Story 1. Gmail was launched around 2004 when it was invite only. My friend had a small number of invitations. Story 2. I worked for a movie theater chain in 1996. My boss acquired a video home system tape of Jesus versus Santa Claus at an industry event. We watched that tape a dozen times and laughed a lot. 6 months later, South Park debuted on Comedy Central, and we were excited it had been picked up. Story 3. We weren't allowed to have cola much growing up, but we drank a lot of seltzer water. I kept drinking it as an adult, and people made fun of me because it was not something people casually drank. They assumed it was a mixer, as if I were drinking straight margarita mix, or something from a frilly health store. Then LaCroix came along and made seltzer suddenly cool a few years ago. I'm glad it is more common now with many flavors, but I used to get teased so much for it. Story 4. Spotify. I remember I had to use a virtual private network to access it in my country. Story 5. Snowboarding. You couldn't even bring them to resorts in 1983. Story 6. I sent an email message from my car using a Hewlett-Packard 48G calculator and a ham radio in 1993. That feat was published in a technical magazine. Nothing about that first sentence sounds cool, but I know the G is for gangster. Thanks for the positive response and the awards. To answer common questions, I wrote a terminal emulator for the Hewlett-Packard 48G. It communicated with a terminal node controller, which is like a modem that interfaces between the calculator and the radio. The message, I do not remember the exact details, but I was 16, probably went to my mother's Prodigy account to say, "Hi Mom." It traveled through the ham radio packet network until it reached a node with an internet bridge. The car was my piece of junk 1988 Mustang that I bought for $1,800. Finally, the source for G being gangster in Hewlett-Packard 48G comes from the Nerd Rap Entertainment System album by YT Cracker. Story 7. Bitcoin. Altcoins did not exist when I got started with it. Mandatory disclaimer. No, I'm not a millionaire now. Story 8. A friend from high school asked me in math class one day if I wanted to go to a concert with her that night. Her sister had extra tickets and thought I would want to go. It was the New Kids on the Block comeback tour, and I said sure, why not? My mother did not mind. We sat around chatting before the show. The opening act was a woman who appeared to be drunk, but her music was really good. No one had heard of her, and she performed only a few songs, but her music was an earworm that was hard to get rid of once it took hold. I went home that night and searched online for her single Just Dance and downloaded it immediately. That is how I discovered Lady Gaga. Story 9. The How to Train Your Dragon books are unfortunately not cool yet. Story 10. I saw Borat at a film festival and could not quote the jokes to anyone for months. Story 11. I used to record myself playing video games when I was about 5 or 6. After my parents gave me the video cassette recorder they had replaced in the living room. This early hobby led a friend and me to make video game playthroughs on YouTube in 2007. We were certainly not the first, but we were very early. We also used a capture card from the start instead of the old method of filming the screen, which looked terrible. Story 12. I remember when you could read every comic featuring Deadpool in under 2 hours. Around that time, I said an Iron Man movie with a washed-up actor to play him would go over worse than Daredevil. Story 13. I discovered the Lonely Islands website when I was about 11 or 12, in 2002 or 2003, before Andy Samberg, Akiva, and Yorma were famous. They had a video that spliced old Nintendo Entertainment System games together into a skit, and it was hilarious. Story 14. Hulu in 2008 was completely free and browser-based, with no advertisements. It was the only way for me to watch new episodes of Heroes every week. Story 15. I first saw The Simpsons when it was a sketch on The Tracy Ullman Show and thought it was the funniest thing I had ever seen. I was ecstatic when I learned they were making a full series. I watched it religiously until around seasons 15 or 16, then switched to watching it occasionally, as most of us did. Story 16. I was listening to Nirvana's Blue on student radio in New Zealand in 1989 and thinking these guys were good. Story 17. My parents used to use Amazon as an online bookstore before it became much more than that. Story 18. I read Fight Club because it was featured prominently in Borders. At the time, no one had heard of it or its amazing author. Story 19. I was into memes when they were called demotivational posters. Story 20. I was in the beta for Xbox Live. It came on a compact disc that you had to install on your original Xbox. Halo Combat Evolved on Xbox Connect was where the real action was, though. Story 21. I attended Comic-Con before most people knew it existed. You could show up the day you wanted, buy a ticket, and go in and shop. I have some incredible collectible movie memorabilia from that time. I never thought it would become the enormous event it is today. Story 22. I remember going around to stores trying to find all 6 issues of the Infinity Gauntlet. I had read one while waiting for my mom to finish grocery shopping, and I was hooked. That made me a dork in the early 1990s, but now it's a billion-dollar worldwide phenomenon. Fucking A. Story 23. I contracted swine influenza in February 2008 and was the 3rd reported case worldwide. Story 24. I was a beta tester for Gmail, and I still have the welcome email from 2004. In an ironic twist of fate, I became a Google employee 15 years later, and now I get to beta test all kinds of cool things, including features outside my product area. Story 25. I hated Bill Cosby. To graduate high school in 2008, I had to complete 30 hours of volunteer work at the local Jell-O museum, where I was forced to listen to his old Jell-O commercials on a loop. I should also mention it was the town where many children developed a mass conversion disorder and believed they had Tourette syndrome. I have a mild form of Tourette syndrome, so that is another thing I experienced before it became common. Story 26. I joined Instagram when it was a photography app in 2011. Story 27. I had over 300 Bitcoin when it traded at approximately $3. I spent almost all of it on drugs and a fake identification, and then lost the remainder when the Silk Road was seized. Keeps me up at night. Story 28. I do not want to brag, but I bought some N95 respirators in the 2nd week of January. Some people do and some do not, but I have never been in this position before and am unsure of the etiquette. Thank you for the upvotes and the awards. From a 62-year-old Canadian woman who is a bit overwhelmed. Story 29. I saw the pilot episode of South Park. I thought it was the funniest thing ever. I showed it to a coworker who said, "That's the stupidest thing I've seen." Fast forward to when South Park becomes a hit, and he comes in and asks, "Have you seen this hilarious cartoon called South Park?" I said, "Do you remember the pilot episode one showed you?" He was quiet for a while after that. Story 30. I downloaded Snapchat when it was in its early stages and then deleted the application shortly after because none of my friends were on it. People still ask me how I got my username, Osnapio. Story 31. I was in marching band with Markiplier. He was my trumpet section leader. It's strange to see all the memes and famous people talking about someone I went to high school with. Story 32. I had computers back when all they had was 8 kilobytes of random access memory and a cassette drive for programs. You would often spend all night typing in a program printed in a magazine just to have to go through it all again because of a typing error. I had a Tandy Radio Shack TRS-80 Model I around 1980. Computers did not really become popular at home until machines like the Commodore 64. I also had a Sorcerer and Acorn and an old IMSAI 8080. It helped a bit when the school finally got Apple IIE computers. Coincidentally, that is the last Apple computer I have used. I can see the use for them, but they would personally drive me absolutely crazy compared with a personal computer. Story 33. I started watching Smosh videos when they had only a couple uploaded. They were probably the first YouTube creators I watched religiously. Their early food battle videos were hilarious. There was nothing like the good old Smosh. Story 34. I probably had one of the first top 10 channels in 2011 where I posted lists about games. I gave up because the editing and workload were too much, but a few years later those channels became very popular. Story 35. A long time ago I went to a bar to see a neo-punk band play, although it was illegal because I was under the legal drinking age. I liked it enough that I bought one of their cassette tapes before compact discs were common. The band was Green Day. Story 36. Since my dad is a big fan of Japanese pop culture, We bought a pack of 500 black medical masks because we saw people in Japan using them for sickness and allergies. A year later, the pandemic started, and being a big fan paid off. Bonus story. Once I wore one of these masks to school, and the principal confiscated it because it was distracting, even though I had a mild cough and sore throat. I bet you feel really foolish right now, Mr. Malavar. Story 37. I was out for the night when I was 17 to 19. A friend and I went to a pub in Oxfordshire where we thought we would have a chance to pick up some girls. We got drunk, took ecstasy, and listened to the band, who were pretty good. After their set, we popped out of the pub for a quick joint. The band walked over and asked for a toke. We spent the rest of the evening in the back of their van, smoking weed and drinking. It turned out the band was an unknown indie rock group called Radiohead. A couple of weeks later, the song Creep went international. I have been a fan ever since. Story 38. I lived in Korea in the 1990s and was really into Dragon Ball Z comics. I moved to the United States in 1995, and no one knew what it was. By the time I was in high school, it was all the rage. Story 39. I played RuneScape a long time ago. Okay, it was never cool, but it meant a lot to me. Story 40. I got stoned with John Mayer in a college town before he released a compact disc. He was playing the blues at a club in front of 100 people, and I only caught the last song. We got high. He gave me the compact disc and wrote on it. A few weeks later, I put the disc in and quickly tossed it out. So I was an early adopter of John Mayer playing the blues and of discarding his trash studio albums. Story 41. When I started college in 1993, the first big party I went to was a sorority party with a band. I arrived before the band went on, and when I saw a saxophone set up on stage, I set my beer down on the stage in front of where the sax player would be because I had played alto sax in high school. They turned out to be really good live. A few weeks later, the Dave Matthews Band's first album came out, and I bought it the first day. I will never forget taking that compact disc home at Christmas break and playing it for high school friends who said, "What the fuck is this shit?" The next year, they all apologized because they became fans once the band got popular. I saw the band a few times, but after they became very big, I did not like their new material and stopped listening to them. The last time I saw them, I remember seeing Daisy Fuentes outside the theater interviewing people after the show and feeling they were about to become a big music television band. However, from time to time I hear an old tune of theirs and remember when I thought they were very cool. Edit. I did not stop listening to them because they got popular. Their song styles changed after the second album, and it just was not for me. We all change and evolve. Story 42. I was into vinyl before it made a comeback. Since nobody in the 1990s or early 2000s wanted their records, I acquired more than 500 records for free or nearly free. Story 43. I was sleeping with my ex long before everyone started doing it. Story 44. I was reading Harry Potter from day one. I remember how this happened so clearly. My dad's birthday fell on the same day the book was released in the United States, September 1st, 1998, and we got him a gift certificate to Barnes & Noble among a few other things. The very next day my dad and I went to Barnes & Noble. He picked two books. One was a New York Mets coffee table book, and the other was the newly released Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, which he handed to me. There were stacks and stacks of them on a display table right at the front of the store. He mentioned that he had read an article about how good the book was a few weeks earlier and that it would be released in the United States soon. We were in the store for all of 5 minutes. I read the first 2 chapters on the way home and was immediately hooked. I swear I read that book a dozen times before going to the midnight release of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets the following year. Story 45. I remember looking for an Ask Jeeves alternative search engine back in the day for some schoolwork. I found many low-quality ones, but one had a simple design without the bells and whistles and used friendly primary colors, and it was Google. Story 46. I saw Metallica for my first concert in 1985 on the Ride the Lightning tour in Austin, Texas. If I remember correctly, the other bands that night were a local band, Wasp and Armored Saint. Story 47. I was watching YouTube in 2005, back when Naruto episodes were allowed and split into 3 parts. That is also how I first found pornography. Laughing out loud. Story 48. I'm getting really into Mongolian throat singing. It isn't mainstream yet, but wait and see. Story 49. Donald Glover was part of a comedy group called Derek Comedy that was absolutely hilarious. Story 50. One of my favorites is Minecraft. I played it when it was just bare bones. I liked Owl City before it became popular. Story 51. One of my brothers graduated high school in 1994, and one of his friends moved from New Hampshire to California. When he came back to visit, he brought a cassette tape of early Sublime. 2 or 3 years later, they became popular. 5 or 6 years later, everyone in junior high wore that Sun t-shirt and claimed they had discovered the best band ever. A similar thing happened years later with the Dropkick Murphys, but I'm not really into them, so I don't mind letting it go. Story 52. I saw Tegan and Sarah when they were an opening act. They did not even have the lights turned down. Now a ticket to their shows costs about $60. Story 53. I once searched Google for Eminem and it returned 0 results. I was an editor at AllMusic at the time and emailed my higher-ups to tell them he needed a listing as soon as possible. Story 54. Sperry's. Mind you, I was not your basic preppy white boy but a dark-skinned Mexican with no sense of style. My mom heard these would be the next fashion item and bought the shoes the summer before they blew up. Throughout the year I was made fun of in middle school for my poor people shoes. I eventually got so frustrated that I threw them away. August came around and on the first day of school everyone was hyping each other up about their Sperry's. Even if I had gone back and bought or found my old pair, I would have been teased for copying their style. Story 55. When I was 4, I climbed into our new refrigerator before they plugged it in. I was in it before it was cool. Story 56. Online dating. I met my wife in a Yahoo chat room in the year 2000. Story 57. I was into the YouTube channel binging with Babish back when he made his 2nd or 3rd video. Story 58. The main one was Twitter when flip phones were king. You had to text it to update your status. Story 59. I was chugging Pabst Blue Ribbon years before it became the go-to hipster brew. Story 60. I watched Avatar: The Last Airbender when it was airing, and as an adult people criticized me for watching a children's cartoon. Edit. Since this comment is receiving a lot of attention, I want to talk about Lake Laogai. The term Laogai comes from Laodong Gai Zhao, which translates to reform through labor. They were actual Chinese forced labor prison camps. Anyone who was seen as a counter-revolutionary by the Chinese Communist Party was sent to Laogai, where they were forced to produce goods that were exported to the West, with all profits going to the state. The camps also served to reform prisoners' political beliefs to align with the party's ideology. Although the camps are no longer called Laogai, they continue to exist as prisons today. Story 61. Curl care. My mom was always knowledgeable and taught me how to properly care for my hair before all the jazzy products came out. Now everyone who called me Poodle and Fuzzy Brains in school, back when straightening hair was popular, is asking me what I use. Story 62. I remember Dragon Force before they were in Guitar Hero. I never thought they would become well known, even though they were always awesome. Story 63. I would hate to say it, but Fortnite was different before it became a battle royale. I was playing with a buddy who decided to quit for some reason before the change. Story 64. The Pioneer Woman. I found her blog years ago when it was just a blog. She is great, but she is better in writing than speaking on camera. Story 65. Reddit. This account is rather recent, but I discovered the platform in its infancy. It had less content back then, but the discussions were better. Then the mainstream caught up. Story 66. Adult coloring has always appealed to me. I never liked drawing but loved coloring, so as I grew up I sought out all kinds of coloring books. I loved how calming it was, and I often colored with my grandparents, creating many fond memories. I was teased for my hobby until it became popular in recent years. Story 67. I was one of the first 100 followers of Ray William Johnson before he became famous and later faded. I was also on the FJ application when One Direction was rumored to be on it. Story 68. I washed my hands for 20 seconds and used a paper towel on the sink and door handles well before the coronavirus pandemic. Story 69. I was into the British version of The Office before there was an American version. Story 70. I contracted coronavirus disease 2019 on a trip to Asia before the global outbreak. When I returned to Canada, I was placed in a glass hospital room even though I no longer had the illness, because there were no reported cases yet and they feared I would be patient zero. Story 71. Korean pop existed long before the artist Psy and Bangtan Sonyeondan. When Gangnam Style was played in bars, I was shocked. I did not expect it to become worldwide. The Korean pop community now feels toxic and strange, and I do not understand how it reached this point. Story 72. I dressed up as a slutty minion for Halloween 2010. I had to pin printed minions to my costume so people would know what the hell I was. I was ahead of my time. By 2015, there were slutty minions everywhere. Story 73. I was reading the Song of Ice and Fire series, better known as Game of Thrones, before the show was made. Sadly, I am pretty sure we will never get the last two books. Story 74. Sriracha for white people. When I met my Asian girlfriend in 1995, she had a bottle in the fridge and loved it. Since then, we have always kept a bottle in the fridge. Suddenly, it became a phenomenon. Story 75. Raves and massives were earlier terms. Festivals were once called massives, but massives were not as large as today's festivals. Story 76. I was a big Iron Man comic fan. When they cast a washed-up alcoholic to play him in the movie, I got really excited. That's his character flaw in the original comics, for your information. There was not enough depressed alcoholism in the movies, though, which made me sad. I still enjoyed them. The ending was fitting, but it would have been more fitting if the films had explored those issues more, in my opinion. Story 77. I lived in Austin before Tito's Vodka went nationwide. After I moved back to the Midwest, it took a couple of years following the mass release for it to really take off. Story 78. Social isolation before the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic. Major depression will do that to you. Story 79. I thrifted because my family was poor, not because we thought it was cool, it was purely for survival. Story 80. I'm not rich from Bitcoin. I remember thinking about buying a couple when it was about $10 each, but I thought, no, I'm not spending money on it. I'll just see how much I can mine with my old computer. I still made a couple of bucks selling some during the big spikes. Story 81. I feel like being an introvert is glorified these days. I have been an introvert my whole life, and now I see posts from obvious extroverts calling themselves introverts. Story 82. Nothing. I grew up in a household that sheltered me from everything, so I have been behind on every trend my entire life. Story 83. Christina Grimmie had the most amazing voice. I discovered her on YouTube when she had just started posting videos. I do not think she ever became as famous as she should have. Story 84. I read Death Note before it was released in English. I used to download translated chapters and burn the series onto compact discs for people who did not have reliable internet access or enough computer time to download it themselves. I am pretty sure I did this using a dial-up connection. Story 85. Before hipsters were widely known, I disliked things simply because they were mainstream. That makes me a hipster before it was cool. When hipster culture went mainstream, I deliberately stopped behaving that way because I felt I could no longer like it. Story 86. I have been gluten-free due to celiac disease for almost 30 years. Story 87. I warned people about coronavirus disease 2019 and about wearing masks in mid-January. Sadly, I work at a place with many international travelers, especially from China, so I contracted it that month. Story 88. So you're a 22-year-old virgin? Motherfucker, I was born a virgin. Story 89. I really liked Lin-Manuel Miranda after In the Heights, long before Hamilton made him a superstar. Story 90. Lana Del Rey. I started liking her music back in the early 2000s when she was known as Lizzie Grant. I also enjoyed Animal Crossing. Story 91. I have followed the Joe Exotic saga for years. I am one of 20 libertarians in the state. Story 92. My white suburban mother did yoga in the 1970s when it was considered a hippie thing. Story 93. I remember when Owl City only had a couple of songs on a MySpace page. Story 94. Thrifting. I grew up with a single mother and tried to save a few dollars wherever we could. I was made fun of through high school for it, and then suddenly my peers thought it was cool and artsy. It is better for the environment, so I guess it is good, but we children of single parents were ahead of the curve. Story 95. I got tickets for $12 on a whim to see Churches live for one song at their first show in Columbus, before their first album came out. Maybe 100 people were there in total. They took 10 minutes after every song to talk to the crowd. I got a signed poster at Magnolia Thunderpussy and took photos with them. 2 years later, I saw them at a sold-out show at one of the largest concert venues in Columbus, and the crowd was all over them. Story 96. I was playing the original The Legend of Zelda before Nintendo Magazine and Nintendo Power started publishing full maps. What the hell? Story 97. I got a Deadpool tattoo long before the movies because I liked what the comics used to be. Now the tattoo is a burden in public because strangers who like the movies assume they are your friend. Story 98. I was a fan of Donald Glover, also known as Childish Gambino, back in 2005 when Derek Comedy was the only thing he was known for. I loved their skits. He was just a wee lad then. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.